One Piece is the best-selling comic book of all time and is swiftly chasing down Harry Potter for the title of the best-selling book series of all time too. In spite of this, I've never really felt that connected to it. I read it for the first time many years ago now, and well, that was a very young me. Perhaps too young. And so with the story slowly but surely meandering its way through what promises to be its final saga, the culmination of nearly 28 years of hard work from Eiichiro Oda, I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. What did younger me not understand? Or did I understand it and will stand by my opinion that One Piece isn't what it's all cracked up to be? Well, let's begin my own pirate adventure and find out. Of course, it all begins with Luffy, a seemingly ambitious, albeit goofy kid who dreams of being free. From the very first chapter, you can tell he wants to make a difference. He doesn't just want to be a pirate, he wants to be the kind of pirate who can go anywhere, do anything, and live without limits. This is something which not only will go on to be the entire foundation of everything he believes in, but it's something he's been led to believe from as early as when we first meet him in chapter 1, when his eyes open wide, full of inspiration of the idea of what freedom represents and how a pirate can achieve it. That's why for Luffy, Shanks and the red-haired pirates are everything he wants to be. They are who taught him the definition of freedom. But it's not all smooth sailing. You see, Luffy, is the hungry and curious kid that he is, eats a strange-looking fruit called the Gomu Gomu no Mi, or at least that's what it was called back in the day. Nonetheless, this one single action would change not just his life, but destiny itself. It was a turning point in the entire history of the One Piece world, but we'll get into that another time. Because whilst Luffy doesn't know it at first, this was one of the mysterious devil fruits, and eating it gives him a rubbery body whilst taking away his ability to swim forever. Not that he could swim. It's a funny but bittersweet moment because whilst Luffy gains this incredible power, he loses something pirates rely on, the sea itself. Still, overcoming unconventional challenges that life throws at him is kinda Luffy's whole thing. He is a shonen protagonist after all. However, Shanks is the one who really shapes Luffy's path. When bandits show up and mock him and the red-haired crew, he laughs it off, teaching Luffy an important lesson. That true strength isn't about getting worked up over every insult. But when Luffy's life is on the line, Shanks doesn't hesitate. He steps in with his crew, saving him from both the bandits and a Sea King, sacrificing his arm in the process. That moment hits hard, and it shows Luffy that being a pirate isn't just about adventure, it's about protecting the people and ideals you care about, something which becomes imperative for Luffy's entire journey. The entire core of what One Piece is built upon stems from this moment, which is symbolized by Shanks placing his straw hat on Luffy's head before leaving, a reminder of the life Luffy is destined to live. Thus, he sets off on his own journey 10 years later with that dream in his heart. Here he quickly meets Koby, a timid kid stuck working for the cruel pirate Alvida. Now, Koby is the total opposite of Luffy. Shy, scared, and restricted to what others tell him. But something about Luffy changes him. Luffy doesn't see Koby as weak or hopeless. Instead, he tells Koby to chase his own dreams of joining the Navy. Watching him finally stand up to Alvida is the first moment where you see how Luffy's belief in freedom and self-determination inspires everyone around him, and it certainly won't be the last. However, once Alvida is dealt with, Luffy ends up in Shell's Town and meets Zoro, a swordsman with a fearsome reputation as a skilled pirate bounty hunter chained up in a Navy prison. Everyone assumes he's some kind of monster, a total demon, but then you see this moment of kindness. A little girl sneaks Zoro a rice ball, and the guards stomp on it and throw it in the dirt for the ants for disrespecting Helmeppo, the son of the captain of the island. But when the dust has settled, so to speak, Zoro doesn't snap or yell. Instead, he eats the dirty rice ball to make the girl feel better. That single act is enough to flip the entire perception of him. It sets up this world as morally grey. It blurs the line between what's really good or bad, something which we'll touch on a little bit more later, but what's important is that we realise that Zoro is not a villain, but someone who values honour, kindness and loyalty. Luffy recognises this in him instantly, wanting Zoro as part of his crew, even if he doesn't want it to happen yet. However, when when Zoro agrees to team up with him to take down Captain Morgan, it truly does feel like the beginning of something special. Morgan's defeat isn't just a victory for the novice pirates of the soon-to-be Straw Hat crew, it's a symbol of what they stand for, fighting against oppression and protecting freedom. They liberate Shellstown. Again, something which becomes a must for any One Piece arc. In fact, these 7 chapters encapsulate every arc from here on out. But in spite of this, Oda's ability to paint a new picture on stories that mostly follow the same beats throughout is a testament to his skills, even if it can sometimes get repetitive. Bringing us onto Orangetown. You see, after setting out on their journey, Luffy and Zoro find themselves completely lost at sea, hungry and desperate for food. Things spiral into chaos when Luffy, spotting a bird overhead, tries to catch it using his rubber powers, only for the bird to snatch him up and fly away. Meanwhile, Zoro rows after him and runs into 3 pirates stranded in the water. These pirates, part of Buggy the Clown's crew, reveal their misfortunes. You see, they were tricked and stranded by a cunning thief named Nami, who's been stealing from pirates, setting the stage for the chaos waiting them in Orangetown. As that is where Nami is on the run from Buggy's crew after stealing a map of the Grand Line. When Luffy crashes into her escape route, she uses the opportunity to trick him into helping her fight off the pursuing pirates. Luffy easily defeats them, and Nami is impressed by his strength until she finds out that he's a pirate. That is where her hatred for pirates takes over, and she decides to turn Luffy into Buggy in an attempt to join his crew and steal his treasure. And this is where we meet one of One Piece's best and most lovable characters, Buggy the Clown, a loud, flamboyant pirate captain whose devil fruit, the Baratie no Mi, allows him to split his body into pieces. He is the first major antagonist to truly challenge Luffy, not just physically, but philosophically. While Luffy's dream of becoming Pirate King is driven by his desire for ultimate freedom, Buggy's ambitions revolve entirely around greed and material wealth. This contrast is reflected in their respective treasures. Luffy's most prized possession is his seemingly worthless straw hat, which carries immense personal meaning as a symbol of his promise to Shanks. Whereas for Buggy, treasure in his sense is literal. It's gold, jewels, and shiny objects that he sees as the ultimate measure of happiness and success. The arc dives deeper into the theme of treasure through smaller, heartfelt moments, one of the most memorable, of course, being the story of Chocho, a loyal dog who guards his late master's pet shop. Despite his master being long gone, Chocho stays to protect the store, treating it as their treasure. When Buggy's first mate, Moji, arrives and burns the shop down, it's a simply heartbreaking moment. Thus, of course, Luffy steps in to protect Chocho, mirroring what Shanks did for him all those years ago. Just like Shanks, Luffy is ridiculed as Moji mocks him, calling him weak and insignificant, but Luffy doesn't react. He only takes action when Moji targets Chocho's treasure. This is where Luffy shows the same resolve Shanks once did, stepping in not out of pride, but out of a deep sense of justice and respect for others' treasures. Then the arc ultimately builds up to a climactic battle between Luffy and Buggy, a duel between 2 Pirate King wannabes. You see, whilst both aspire to the same title, their motivations couldn't be more different. Luffy dreams of becoming Pirate King to achieve ultimate freedom, a life where he can live freely and inspire others to chase their own dreams. Buggy, on the other hand, sees the title as a means to hoard more treasure and gain more superficial power. And so this clash isn't just a fight between 2 pirates, it's a battle between 2 visions of what it means to be a pirate. The parallels between Luffy and Buggy are emphasized through their devil fruit powers. Luffy's Guma Guma no Mi allows him to stretch and adapt, symbolizing his boundless ambition and resilience. Buggy's Baratie no Mi, on the other hand, lets him detach and separate his body parts, reflecting his fragmented, survivalist nature. Whilst Luffy's abilities allow him to get in close and personal with anyone and everyone, Buggy's allow him to stay distant. Even when the mayor demands Buggy come down face to face and fight like a man, he refuses and fights at a distance with his fruit. Even their weaknesses highlight their differences. Luffy is immune to blunt force but vulnerable to slashes, whilst Buggy is immune to slashes but weak against blunt force. These powers, like their personalities, form a yin-yang dynamic, showing them as 2 sides of the same coin. Luffy stretches to unite and protect, whilst Buggy fragments and separates to manipulate and avoid a direct conflict. And the glue that binds them both together is Shanks. You see, Buggy and him have a past together as young crewmates on a pirate ship, but whilst Shanks valued camaraderie and adventure, Buggy's greed and survivalist mindset drove them apart. His grudge against Shanks stems from a fateful moment when his obsession with treasure led him to accidentally eating a devil fruit and losing his ability to swim. Now, Buggy sees Luffy, Shanks' protege, as a reflection of the ideals he despises. But it also highlights the thin line between villain and camaraderie I touched on earlier. Luffy hates Buggy for talking down on Shanks. In spite of this, he's a former friend and ally of the man he looks up to most. Kobe also blurs these lines. Kobe's entire life was changed by Luffy, yet now, on paper, they are in fact enemies. Everything in the short 20 or so chapters of this story so far have done a simply immaculate job of highlighting how nothing is black and white. Everything is a unique experience for people, and that is what makes life great. That's why in the 2 short arcs we've had so far, and many more to come, the main antagonists usually act in a way that takes away that uniqueness and freedom from people, bringing us to the climax of this battle and arc. Buggy stabs Luffy's straw hat, damaging his most precious treasure. It's a direct attack on Luffy's ideals and everything that the straw hat represents. This fuels Luffy's determination, and with help from Nami and Zoro, he turns the tide in battle. As Nami then ties up Buggy's separated body parts, subtly highlighting that his inability to meaningfully connect with others is his primary weakness. We literally see his crew pretend to be unconscious so as to not get involved with Luffy as he delivers a finishing blow that sends him flying. But as the dust settles, Luffy, Zoro and Nami, the Straw Hat crew, escape from Orange Town. In a final act of kindness, Luffy leaves behind some of Nami's stolen treasure to help the townspeople rebuild, showing his understanding of what true treasure really means. This angers and surprises Nami, who's still grappling with the idea of Luffy's idealism, but it also plants the first seed of trust between them. It's another step in Luffy's journey to the Grand Line, and it leaves you eager to see what comes next, which is Syrup Village. After a brief stop on the island of rare animals where the Straw Hats meet Gaimon, they arrive at Syrup Village. Now this arc is Oda's first fumble, I would say. Maybe fumble is a bit harsh. However, there is no denying, for me at least, that this is East Blue's weakest arc, and by some margin. In spite of this, it's where we meet one of the most important characters in One Piece, Usopp. He is the village liar, running through town every day shouting that pirates are coming, except they never are. It's the boy who cried wolf. Furthermore, Usopp's the kind of guy who spins grand stories about himself, commanding a fearsome pirate crew made up of 3 kids who hang on to his every word. But it doesn't take long to realize that Usopp's bravado is just that. Bravado. He's no warrior, no legendary pirate. He's a kid with a slingshot and a dream. But that doesn't mean he's weak. Despite all the lies, Usopp has something real. Courage. Not the kind that comes from brute strength, but the kind that comes from acting even when you're terrified. And that is what this arc is really about. Because whilst the village doesn't take Usopp seriously, one person does, and that is Kaya, a sickly but kind-hearted girl who lost her parents and spends most of her days confined to a mansion. Usopp visits her, telling her wild pirate stories that he made up to make her smile. But what he doesn't realize is that there is a wolf lurking in the mansion. You see, Kaya's butler, Klahadore, is hiding a dark secret. He's not just a well-mannered servant, he's Captain Kuro, a former pirate captain who faked his own execution years ago to escape the life of piracy. He subsequently spent the last 3 years working in the shadows, earning Kaya's trust so that he could one day take her fortune for himself. And now the time has come to put his plan into motion. Now this reveal should feel shocking, but the way it happens is it's not great. Luffy and Usopp just happen to be in the right place at the right time, overhearing Kuro's entire plan in a way that answers all of Usopp's questions far too conveniently for me. Thus, the execution of the twist feels forced, and that is a reoccurring problem I think with this arc. More often than not, the plot moves the characters rather than the characters moving the plot. Nonetheless, Usopp runs to warn the villagers, but there's just one problem. Nobody believes him. For years, Usopp has told the same lie that pirates are coming, but now, for the first time, he's telling the truth and no one listens. Even when he rushes to Kaya herself, she assumes that he's just lying and trying to scare her. Thus, with nobody believing him, in that moment, Usopp makes a painful choice. He lies. He tells the villagers that it was all just a joke. There is no danger. He does it to keep them safe, knowing that if they were to get involved, they would only get hurt. From there, Usopp does what he's always pretended to do. He fights pirates. This moment is what makes Usopp so special to me. He's scared, he knows he can't win, but he fights anyway. And yet, despite how strong Usopp is as a character, the arc itself is still weak. If Orangetown blended comedy and stakes well, then Syrup Village struggles. The fight against the Black Cat pirates is frustratingly slow and, dare I say it, boring. With Luffy and Zoro being taken out of the action in the most contrived ways. You've got Luffy literally falling asleep mid-battle due to hypnosis, Zoro, a master swordsman who can cut through steel, spending half the fight struggling to retrieve his swords from a couple of goons. It feels like these moments are there just to force the tension rather than letting the characters drive the conflict naturally. That said, there is one dynamic that does work perfectly. Usopp versus Kuro. You see, they are two sides of the same coin. Both of them live under false identities. Usopp has spent years pretending to be a pirate, telling exaggerated stories to make people laugh. Whilst Kuro has spent years pretending to be a butler, hiding his true nature to manipulate Kaya. But their lies also serve different purposes. Usopp lies to bring happiness. His stories give Kaya something to look forward to, and his bravado makes him a hero in the eyes of his crew. Even when he lies to the villagers, he does it to protect them. All his lives are built on a past and future that he wishes he had, whereas Kuro lies to take everything for himself. His deception is purely selfish in nature, built on control and betrayal. He doesn't just want Kaya's fortune, he wants to erase his past entirely, even if it means killing the very crew that served him. And so this brings us to the climax of the arc, where Kuro finally stops pretending. When he unleashes his shakushi technique, it becomes clear just how different he is from Luffy. Unlike other villains, Kuro hates the pirate life. He doesn't want adventure or freedom or glory, he's just after control. He sees piracy as something beneath him. Thus, he spent years hiding who he was, planning a perfect life where he never had to lift a finger again. That's why when Kuro starts slaughtering his own crew just to speed up his plan, Luffy snaps. Luffy's definition of a pirate isn't about killing or stealing, it's about adventure, dreams, and loyalty to your crew. And so Kuro represents everything that Luffy despises, and that is what makes their final clash feel so satisfying. Luffy defeats Kuro with pure strength, but Usopp gets his own victory in a different way. When Kaya is kidnapped by Django, Usopp, beaten, exhausted, and knowing that he's outmatched, still fights. Thus, with Zoro's help, he stops Django and saves Kaya, proving that he is the brave warrior of the sea that he always wanted to be, following in his father's footsteps. Thus, despite its flaws, Syrup Village absolutely nails its conclusion. Usopp disbands the Usopp Pirates, telling his three little crewmates that the game is over, and so they cry, not wanting to let him go. Furthermore, the village, the very same one that ignored him for years, suddenly feels empty without his daily pirate warnings. But the most beautiful part, when Luffy invites him to join the crew, Usopp doesn't hesitate. For the first time in his life, he doesn't have to pretend to be a pirate, he is one. And with that, the Straw Hats gain not just a new member, but a new ship, the Going Merry. Thus, whilst yes, it's a messy arc, the emotions at the end hit perfectly, almost making it all worth it. But leaving Syrup Village behind, the Straw Hats set sail on the Going Merry, now as a crew of 4. Luffy, Zoro, Nami, for now at least, and Usopp. Their journey taking them to Baratie, a floating restaurant in the middle of the ocean, and that is where we meet Sanji, the restaurant's chain-smoking, smooth-talking, ass-kicking assistant chef. From the very moment he appears, he is different. He's not some goofy, throwaway side character like we've come to be used to. He's got style, charm, charisma, and a serious temper, but most importantly, he's got principles, making him a perfect candidate to join Luffy's crew already. As when a starving pirate named Jin stumbles onto the ship begging for food, the entire kitchen refuses to serve him because he's a part of a dangerous pirate crew, because he's got no money, and because they see him as a threat. But Sanji doesn't care, and that's because Sanji knows what it means to starve. Thus, he brings Jin a plate of food, not out of pity, but because no one deserves to die from hunger, not when he's around. And that act of kindness is what sets everything into motion, because Jin is part of Don Krieg's fleet, and when he returns to his captain, he tells them about Baratie, which can only mean trouble is coming. But when Don Krieg arrives, he and his crew are in bad shape. Practically his entire fleet was just wiped out 1 week into the Grand Line by an unknown force. Thus, he's desperate, starving, and demands food under the promise that he won't attack the restaurant. He gets the food, and of course he immediately goes back on his word, as that is what he's always done to ensure he gets his way. However, Krieg, I would say, is the least compelling villain we've had so far. He's just kind of a power-hungry brute covered in weapons, and his goal of stealing the Baratie to rebuild his fleet, it lacks the kind of personal stakes or thematic weight at least of previous antagonists. He doesn't really challenge Luffy in any meaningful way, he's just an obstacle. Nonetheless, Krieg himself isn't what's important here, it's the man who destroyed his fleet. Because just when things seem to get bad, Krieg's ship is sliced in half, and through the wreckage sails a lone man on a tiny boat, Dracule Hawkeye's Mihawk. From the very moment he arrives, everything changes. This isn't Buggy, this isn't Kuro, this is a whole nother level of pirate. For the first time, we see what the Grand Line is really like. We learn that there truly is an entirely different world out there that makes our Straw Hat crew look small in comparison, despite everything we've seen from them so far. Even Zoro, who's been hyping up his goal of becoming the world's strongest swordsman since the start of the series, and now the current title holder is standing right in front of him. Thus, without hesitation, Zoro challenges Mihawk. In spite of this, he's so unfazed that he doesn't even use his real sword. Instead, he humiliates Zoro with a tiny dagger. In the end, Zoro loses badly, but he refuses to back down. He stands tall even when he knows he's completely outmatched. And in one of the most iconic moments in One Piece history, Mihawk slashes Zoro across the chest, giving him his first major scar. Nonetheless, Zoro smiles, not because he's happy, but because he knows he's just seen how far he's got to go. Like us, he's been hit with a harsh reality check that this adventure, this dream of theirs, is so far off. Regardless, as Mihawk departs, Zoro vows to never lose again, and Luffy, watching his first mate cry out with frustration, knows that this moment is going to define Zoro for the rest of his life. But whilst he was battling Mihawk, there was Sanji fighting a war of his own. One against himself. You see, he wants to find the All Blue, the legendary sea where all the fish in the world gather in one place. The perfect place to set up a sea-bound restaurant. It's his dream, the same way being king of the pirates is for Luffy. But unlike Luffy, Sanji doesn't chase his dream. He's shackled by loyalty. You see, Zeph, the head chef of Baratie, is the whole reason Sanji is alive to begin with. That's because years ago, Zeph saved him from drowning after his famous pirate crew tried to pillage his restaurant. However, stranded on a single lone island with no escape, Zeph gave Sanji all their remaining food to keep him from starving, even going as far to cut off his own leg in secret to survive. Zeph saving Sanji from drowning and losing his right leg because of it directly parallels and contrasts with Shanks Shanks saving Luffy from drowning and losing his left arm. Both serve as defining moments that shape both Luffy and Sanji into the people they are now, reinforcing one of the most crucial themes in One Piece: sacrifice for the next generation. Because of these actions, Luffy takes the ideals of Shanks and makes them his own, setting out to become a pirate who values his crew above all else, whereas Sanji carries the weight of Zeph's sacrifice into his every actions, making sure no one ever has to suffer starvation the way he once did. It's a story of two mentors, two drowning boys, two sacrifices, and two lives forever changed. However, for Sanji, it's also why he refuses to leave Baratie, even though his dream is out there waiting for him. Nonetheless, Don Krieg's attack forces him into action. When Krieg's second in command, Pearl, threatens Zeph's life along with Jin, Sanji doesn't hesitate to throw himself in harm's way. He gets beaten to a pulp, but he refuses to back down. Sanji doesn't care if he dies protecting Zeph, but that is the problem. Like Luffy says to him, Zeph doesn't want Sanji to waste his life. He didn't save him so that he could just rot away on a floating restaurant. He wants Sanji to go out and live, to chase his dream. And in one of the most emotional moments of this arc, Sanji finally understands that. The subsequent fight between Luffy and Don Krieg is then brutal, as Krieg throws everything he has at Luffy, be it poisonous gas, explosives, shuriken, a literal suit of supposedly invincible armor, but none of it matters, because Luffy isn't fighting with strategy, he's fighting through sheer willpower, and that is why Krieg loses, inspiring something in Zeph. Thus, with the battle over, Sanji finally does what he's been afraid to do this entire time. Given the green light by Zeph, the man he admires most, he leaves and follows his dream. But not before a tearful, gut-wrenching goodbye to Zeph and the rest of the Baratie crew. Zeph calls Sanji's cooking terrible, the cooks insult him one last time, but as soon as Sanji turns to leave, they all break down because they love him and he loves them. But as I said, this is a story all about building the next generation, and for that to happen, Sanji has to move forward. Thus, with a new crew member on board, the Straw Hats set off once again. But their journey is about to take a much darker turn. Because during this whole battle, Nami had done a runner. She stole the ship and the treasure, all in a hope to finally make a difference to the life she's been forced to live up until now. One that the crew are about to learn all about in what promises to be the absolute pinnacle of the East Blue Saga, and the arc where most fans will claim is where One Piece as a whole takes that next step towards becoming great. I'm of course talking about Arlong Park. Everything in One Piece up until this point, the adventure, the laughter, the goofy misadventures of this ragtag crew have been leading up to this arc. Was Nami really just a thief out for herself? Had she simply been using Luffy and the others this entire time? Well, like us, when Usopp, Zoro and Johnny finally tracked her down to the Konami Islands, they weren't sure what to expect. But nothing could have prepared them for what they found. Nami wasn't just hiding, she was working for Arlong. Not tricked by him, not forced to serve him, not captured, she was seemingly one of them. The very same Nami who had hated pirates, who ridiculed Luffy for wanting to be one, was standing shoulder to shoulder with the most ruthless pirates in the East Blue. And that is where we meet Arlong himself. Immediately, he feels like an entirely different breed of monster. His presence alone is terrifying. 8 feet tall, rows of serrated teeth, and strength that far outmatches anyone we've seen so far. But the scariest part is that he knows he's untouchable. We don't need some long exposition dump to understand his power and his terror. We see it in Gosa Village. What was once a thriving town is now a graveyard of destruction, houses uprooted and flipped over, all left in ruin because Arlong and his crew got bored. And if that wasn't enough, he publicly executes anyone who even thinks of stepping out of line. And so for the first time in the series, it feels like the Straw Hats might actually be out of their league. Zoro, the strongest, most fearless guy in the crew, gets captured. Usopp, who's scared at the best of times, is absolutely terrified. And even Johnny and the villagers, people who have spent their whole lives dealing with pirates, don't even try to resist. They already know what happens to those who stand up to Arlong. But then comes the big question regarding Nami. Was it really all a lie, and this is where the real gut punch lands. Up until now, we've only known fragments at best of Nami's past. It's hinted at something painful, but we never really got the full picture. But that is when Nojiko finally tells the story and everything clicks together. You see, Nami and her weren't born into wealth or privilege. They were orphans, children with nowhere to go, left on a war-torn battlefield until they were found by Belmier, a no-nonsense ex-marine with a heart big enough to take them in as her own daughters. She didn't have much, granted, just a small tangerine farm, a rickety old house on the outskirts of the village, and barely enough food to go around, but the most important thing is that she had love, and for Nami and Nojiko, for a time, that was enough. But then, Arlong arrived. That day, they put a price on the life of everyone in Kokoyashi village. 50,000 berries for children, 100,000 for adults. If you couldn't pay, it was simple. You die. Belmier only had 100,000 berries, enough to save herself, or enough to save her daughters, but not both. But at that moment, she didn't hesitate. She used the money to pay for Nami and Nojiko's lives, sacrificing herself in the process right in front of her daughters. It is one of the most brutal, heartbreaking moments in all of One Piece, and it hits even harder because it perfectly mirrors Shanks and Luffy's story. When Luffy was a kid, Shanks didn't fight back against the mountain bandits because he knew they weren't worth it, but the moment Luffy's life was in danger, he sacrificed his arm to save him, because that is what real family do. They give without hesitation. Belmier did the same. She had nothing to offer but her life, so she gave it to protect the children she loved. Blood didn't matter to her. Money didn't matter. All that mattered was, again, the next generation. But then we finally understand why Nami cares so much about money. It was never really about greed. It's never been about riches. That was never the treasure she was actually after. Her treasure is something much more personal. It was about survival. For 8 long years, Nami has been stealing from pirates, hoarding every single berry that she could scrape together, all in pursuit of one impossible goal: buying back her village from Arlong. She wasn't betraying the Straw Hats back at Baratie because she wanted to. She was never free enough to make a decision like that to begin with. Yet she almost did it. She was so close. Nami had stolen 93 million berries and could taste her freedom. But then, in one of the cruelest of betrayals in the series, Arlong sets her up. He calls in corrupt marines, ones who were in his pocket, to raid her home and steal her money. And so just like that, 8 years of sacrifice, 8 years of suffering, 8 years of fighting for a dream that wasn't even hers to begin with, gone in an instant. Thus Nami had nothing left. No hope, no future, no treasure, no dream, and no way out. And so, in one final act of pure despair, she grabs a knife and starts stabbing her own arm, trying to carve out the Arlong tattoo she's been branded with until she finally collapses to the ground, shaking. And that is when she finally turns to Luffy.
Luffy, help me. Of course. That's what friends do. He's gonna pay!
Not as a pirate, not as a crewmate, but as a friend. Through her tears, in the quietest, most broken voice, she finally says it. Now, he doesn't care about what Nami has done, what lies she's told, or what reasons she had for betraying him. None of it matters, because to him, she is the Straw Hat crew navigator, and that means she's his friend, and that's all there is to it. Thus, without a word, Luffy takes off his straw hat, the one thing he values more than anything else in the world, his treasure, and places it on Nami's head. It's an act so simple yet so powerful, because this isn't just Luffy reassuring her, it's him silently telling her, don't worry, I've got this now. Just like how Shanks once gave Luffy his hat as a sign of trust and belief in him, Luffy does the same for Nami. It's a promise, a declaration, and to show how close his crew are already, the moment Luffy makes his decision, the rest have already made theirs. Thus, as they approach Arlong Park, Johnny and Yosaku, beaten and bruised from their failed attempts to fight back, stand in their way, but they don't stop them. Instead, they turn to the villagers of Kokoyashi and tell them to wait. They don't need to throw their lives away fighting Arlong anymore, because these guys are about to tear Arlong Park to the ground. And well, Luffy doesn't waste any time. No speeches, no dramatic declarations, just which one is Arlong? Just like that, the Battle of Arlong Park begins. The first true war the Straw Hats ever fight. But this isn't a battle they're expected to win. Fishmen are stronger, faster, and seemingly invincible in the water, but the Straw Hats don't care. As we learn later in the story, these guys are barely human to begin with anyway. Nonetheless, Zoro takes on Hachan, the six-sword-wielding fishman, despite still being covered in wounds from his fight with Mihawk. Every bit of movement causes him immense pain, but he fights anyway, showing the sheer force of his will. Then Sanji battles Kurobi, but unlike Zoro, he has to fight in the worst possible environment for a human, the water. A battle that should have been impossible, yet Sanji finds a way to win, with Oda perhaps even foreshadowing his origins regarding how often Kurobi questions if he's really a normal human. And then there's Usopp. At first he does what Usopp always does, he runs away. But then he remembers Nami. He remembers everything she went through, and so for the first time, Usopp stops running. Instead, he turns around, he fights, and he wins. His first real victory, the one that cements his place amongst the Straw Hats. But then, the final battle, the pinnacle of the East Blue Saga, Luffy versus Arlong. This is where the emotional weight of the entire arc reaches its peak. Arlong doesn't just see Luffy as an enemy, he sees him as an incomprehensible fool. Why would someone risk their life for a mere human girl? But that is his weakness. Whilst Arlong is fighting for a tool, Luffy is fighting for a friend. And so when he sees the map room, the prison where Nami has suffered for years, he doesn't hesitate. But Luffy doesn't just break the room, he obliterates it and the entire building. He not only frees Nami, but erases Arlong's legacy entirely. Then, following one final attack, Luffy stands atop of the destruction, takes a deep breath, and yells for the world to hear that Nami is one of these Straw Hats from that moment forward. Thus, in one of the most meaningful gestures in the series, she replaces her Arlong tattoo, the mark of her enslavement, with something new, a pinwheel and a tangerine. Two symbols of the people who loved her most growing up. Genzo, the closest thing she has really to a father figure, who always made her laugh as a child and kept her in check. And of course, Belmere, the mother who gave her life to protect theirs. And then as the Straw Hats prepare to leave, Nami does something just so perfectly Nami. She sprints towards them at the docks, the villagers screaming after her in a rage, but not because she's leaving, but because she stole all their wallets on the way out. We see this time they're not really angry, because this time she's smiling. An actual, real, genuine smile. The first one she's had in over 8 years. And this is what makes Arlong Park, in my opinion, the best arc in the entire East Blue Saga. It's the first true emotional climax of One Piece. Before this, the series was a fun pirate adventure that, yes, had its tear-jerking moments, but this is where it becomes something more. It becomes something almost legendary. But most of all, this is where Luffy proves why he's a great captain. Not just with his strength, but with his trust. He never once doubted Nami, and in the end, that's what saved her. With Arlong defeated and the crew finally whole, the Straw Hats set sail to their next great adventure. But there's one final stop. Loguetown. The place where the Pirate King himself met his end, and where Luffy almost meets his. It's the final stop before the Grand Line, and fittingly, it's where fate plays its biggest hand yet. Luffy is eager to stand where Gold Roger once stood as he climbs the execution platform, only for Buggy, this time back with a vengeance, to seize the moment and nearly execute him. And so, what does Luffy do? He laughs. Because this is what it means to be free. But then, lightning strikes. Buggy's sword is shattered and Luffy is saved. Is it a freak accident, or is it something more? Well, before anyone can process it, Captain Smoker enters the scene, a marine unlike any before him, pinning Luffy down effortlessly, proving that not every enemy can just be punched away, a taste of the kind of power system shift that we can expect going forward. But then, he appears. A cloaked man with a tattooed face. Monkey D. Dragon. Obviously, we don't flat out know who this guy is at this moment, but it's still a spine-chilling moment in hindsight, especially when you consider all the theories of his devil fruit power and pinning the storm appearing on him. Nonetheless, he stops Smoker and watches as Luffy escapes. It's the first moment we get the idea that Luffy is part of something far bigger than we all realized. But meanwhile, Zoro also gains two powerful new swords, one of them being cursed, proving that fate is in play, as, of course, fate and destiny play a huge role in the future of One Piece. Those back at Luffy's home village even question if it's destiny steering Luffy. But talking of such a thing, the Straw Hats barely escape as the storm prepares them towards the Grand Line, sealing their destiny. And well, that's it for the East Blue Saga, a story of dreams, freedom, and family. Every Straw Hat carries a dream bigger than themselves, and because of this, they've created a bond stronger than that of blood. It's the saga that lays the foundation for everything to follow it. They're legends in the making, and the best part, it's only just beginning. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you leave a like, subscribe if you're not already, and ding that notification bell. And whilst you wait for the next one where we cover the Alabasta Saga, maybe check this video out on your screen right now.